Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Do you know that we have listeners on every single continent in the world, including Antarctica? Today, our guest is coming to us from Cameroon. Her name is Doig, and she is the author of Melvin Fastidious, the Sailor. You know, I really am absolutely blown away by the fact that we have listeners all over the world. I'm blown away that we get to have authors from all over the world. And I love when I get to meet folks who are listeners to the show. I just had such a great time out in Costa Mesa, California, attending and performing and exhibiting at the Orange County Children's Book Festival. What a great time. Met so many of the authors that have been on the show. Met so many great listeners, and we met some new listeners, too. I hope the same happens at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair. That's right. The Reading with Your Kids podcast will be at the 17th Annual Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 23rd and 24th at Navy Pier. This is a super event where kids and families can play with life-size toys and games from all around the world, meet inventors, authors, characters, enjoy interactive stage shows, and so much more. And this immersive hands-on event, you can save $3 by buying your tickets at shytag.com. That's CHITAG.com. And using the promo code RWYK. That's the Reading with Your Kids initials. RWYK saves $3 off of each ticket, and there's no limit as to how many tickets you can buy. Come on and join us at the totally interactive Reading with Your Kids booth at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, Navy Pier, November 23rd and 24th. Joining us right now from Yaoundé in Cameroon, our first guest from Cameroon. She is the author of Melvin Fastidious, the Sailor. Please welcome to the show, Dawn Doig. Dawn, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
We're so happy to have you. We're excited. We've had guests from all over the world, from Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, all throughout Europe and even Central America. But this is our first, and also South Africa. But this is our first time we've spoken to somebody from Cameroon.
Well, I guess that makes me a little bit special then.
Absolutely. Well, you're special no matter where you are. So tell us about Melvin Fastidious, the Sailor, please.
Well, Melvin Fastidious was inspired by my father. He just turned 80 years old in June, and he's a veteran of the Canadian Navy. And I had a dream one night and got up the next day and wrote the book. Throughout the years, we've laughed because my father definitely has OCD. And so that's actually what inspired the book. It was about his particular ways when it came to his uniform, to the way things had to be when he was playing cards, just generally everything in his life had, everything has its place. He would get down on his hands and knees and pick, we called them the bingles, when he fluffs that around the carpet, he would get down with his masking tape and pick those up. But, we laughed about it a lot over the years. And with Dad getting older, I thought it would be really nice for him to have a book, commemorating the time he did in the Navy, but also to, reflect on our life with him as father with OCD. So basically that's where it came from. So.
Well, that's really beautiful. And I have to say, I have to give you credit. I speak to creative people all the time who tell me the same thing. I had this idea, I had a dream, and I didn't get up, and it's gone. And I know, I keep a little notebook by the side of my bed. I know people who have, little voice recorders next to their bed, just so when those thoughts come to them in the middle of the night, they can get up and scribble something. Usually when I wake up and I look at whatever I scribbled, I can't understand it anyways. But That's amazing that you actually had this dream and you were able to remember it in the morning and then create the book.
Yeah, actually, the last few books that I've written and had published actually came as dreams. So, yeah, it's interesting. You just never know when. I mean, the inspiration's all around you, but you never know when it's actually going to come out as a story or, hit your mind that, oh, this is a story that would be worth sharing with the world. So, yeah. But my dad received a copy in the mail. It wasn't ready when I was home this summer, so he received his copy in the mail, and Mom sent me pictures of him reading it and laughing. He really enjoyed it. So that made it worth it in every sense of the word.
That is wonderful. Now, you and I, we talked about the fact that we both have visited Niagara Falls at different times in our lives. But we also have something else in common. It wasn't my dad, but my grandfather served in the Canadian Navy after he immigrated to North America from Ireland.
Wow.
Yes,
That's really interesting, yes. So was he on the East Coast then or the West Coast?
I believe he was on the East Coast. The story has it that he went to enlist in the United States Navy, and they said, "Oh, great, yeah, we'll have you here. Grab a bucket, and we'll have you swab the decks." And he said, "No, I have a little bit of education. I can go up to Canada and be an officer. I think I'll do that."
Wow. Because my father actually served on both sides of Canada. He was a little bit on the East Coast, mostly on the West Coast.
Now, you mentioned being home. Cameroon is not your home. You're originally from Canada, and
yes.
particularly Vancouver Island, which is I've heard is a beautiful part of Canada. Tell me a little bit, but you've had a fascinating life in that you've literally traveled all over the world, and not just as a tourist. You do what I like to do, which is to get in there and live and to really experience what it's like to live in these different countries.
Yes, and we've explained that to a lot of people that because we have traveled extensively because we live overseas, but it's just not the same as when you actually live in a country and live in the culture, where you're experiencing the day-to-day, sometimes the corruption, sometimes, the celebrations, whatever comes with it. But yeah, you don't really get a good picture of the country when you get a snippet of things, but definitely when you're immersed in the culture, it's a whole other experience.
I absolutely agree. There's so many people I know, they'll go to Cancun, or they tell me, "Oh, we went to Puerto Rico. And what did you see?" "Oh, we stayed on the resort." And I said,
right.
"Oh, so you drank American beer and you had American food." And we just,
I have actually never stayed in an all-inclusive resort. We've rented cars and driven around ourselves,
mm-hmm.
or we've sometimes had local guides, but yeah, we've never done the resort thing.
Yeah, so. We've stayed a day in a resort, but we're the same way. We like to get out and be in the country and either have a local guide, or rent a car. My wife and I just got back from a beautiful trip to Costa Rica, and we did a lot of walking in the city. And at one point, we came out of church and we took a left and we should have taken a right. And when we stopped for directions, the people giving us directions said, "What are you doing here? This is really dangerous. You got to get out of here."
Oh, wow.
And we got back to the hotel safely, and that was wonderful. But it is different to be immersed in the culture. What do you think are the benefits of having experienced different cultures and living in different cultures?
Well, personally, just from discussions that we've had with some people who haven't traveled as much, you do have a whole different perspective on the world in general. Mm-hmm. People get a lot of stuff from the news. For example, we lived in Saudi Arabia for 8 years, and a lot of people had comments about Saudi Arabia, but we were living there daily. So, when you hear that a culture is violent or this and that, but you're actually living there every day, so you know that there's actually more violence in some other countries daily than there is in Saudi Arabia. Even coming to Cameroon, because of some of the stuff that's happening in the English-speaking provinces, people think that we're we're in danger every day. And that's not the case. I mean, Yaoundé has pockets of violence just like other large cities, but it's not like we leave our home every day and feel like, we might get injured or hurt or attacked or anything like that. And the people are wonderful. I mean, again, when you travel, yes, you meet people on the street perhaps, or, you meet people in restaurants when you're ordering, but you don't get to know the people the way that we've been able to, living in Saudi Arabia, living in Kuwait, living in Mongolia, and then now here in Cameroon. So, I don't know, I guess just from conversations we've had, we do have a different perspective on the world in general, and the kindness that you can find everywhere, that people are people, that people just, they want to live their lives, they want to raise their kids, they want their families to have a good life. And you don't always get that sense from what you read in the newspapers or from what you see on TV, because you're always hearing the bad stuff. So, and then even working with the kids, because I'm a teacher now, and so working with some of these young people in different countries, it is really fascinating, and I get a lot of inspiration. I've had inspiration for several of my books from the kids that I've worked with. And had I not traveled, I don't know, or lived overseas, I don't know that I would have written the books I've written, because I wouldn't have had the same experiences to reflect on. You know what I mean?
So it sounds like your experience traveling the world is similar to the experience that we've had in hosting international kids, just discovering how much in common we have with these people who seem to live in these cultures that seem so foreign to us.
Yep, that's right. I mean, even our son graduated from high school in Saudi Arabia, and when he was returning to Canada, we said, going back to Canada to live is not the same experience that you've had going back to Canada to visit family. So we really encouraged him to join the International Students Union when he went back to school. Just because we said your experiences, the way you think, is going to be quite different from the average student who hasn't traveled or seen as much as you've seen. And at his age, at 18, I had never been out of Canada. So even thinking back to the type of person I would have been at 18 versus who he was at 18, because he had been to 25 countries by that time, I do think that both of our children look at the world in a different way than many people do who haven't traveled and just see what the world's like through the news on TV or through watching things on the internet. I actually had a relative ask me, why do you travel? You can see everything on the internet. And it's like, wow, that's just an amazing comment, because for myself, bike riding down Death Road in Bolivia I just can't imagine that it would be the same as watching somebody doing it on the internet or hiking to Machu Picchu, or last summer we trekked the gorillas in Uganda. I can watch somebody doing that on the internet, but the being there and doing it for me was just, it's an experience that it's really hard to describe. So
absolutely. I agree with you. I can't imagine that anything could be like actually bike riding down Death Road in Bolivia. I
tell you, that is the most scared I have ever been, anticipating something, not doing it. We actually arrived at the meeting point in the morning, and I had tears welling up in the corners of my eyes. I was so scared. But it was, a friend of mine said that when you get to the top, you're going to think, oh, what am I doing? And when you get to the bottom, you're going to be like, wow, that was amazing. And would I do it again? Probably not. But but it was an amazing experience, and I can say that I did it and I survived.
Well, that's fascinating. What's also fascinating is, that you have written a number of great books, and I love that they've been inspired, and some of your books have been inspired by the people that you've met as you've trekked around the world. Tell us a little bit about those other books, please.
Okay, well, the first book, actually that I had published was published in 2008 by Widex Canada, and it was written as a humanitarian project to increase public awareness about childhood hearing loss. It's called And So Ahmed Hears, and I wrote it when I was on the Canadian project in Kuwait. So it was inspired by all of the lovely hearing impaired children that I had the opportunity to work with over 23 years as an audiologist. Hadn't been 23 years at that time, but it's just amazing to watch these children as they learn to hear and learn to speak, and as you go that journey with their families. Mm-hmm. So that was actually dedicated to a 3-year-old Indian girl I worked with in Kuwait and her family. And that was republished recently, 2 years ago actually, by Pennant Publications. So it's now, initially it was not available for sale because it was a humanitarian project. So it was available only in Canada to families with hearing impaired children. But now it is available worldwide. And then I'm trying to think, another one it wasn't inspired by anyone, but my son, when he was 3 years old, asked what would happen if you went down the drain in the bathtub. So I wrote a book about that called What a Bath.
What a
and
bath.
I actually illustrated it with a cartoon character I started drawing when I was 12 years old. So that's the only one I've illustrated so far. So it's got my Big Shoe Bears. They're called Big Shoe Bears. And the original book was actually written with movable parts. So my son loved reading it when he was little and moving the bear around and flipping things. And so he has the original still with all the movable parts.
That's just wonderful.
And then I have Petra Pencil Pines for Pizza. That was written to improve public awareness about childhood dysgraphia and difficulties with writing. So that was inspired by 2 little boys I worked with in Mongolia who struggled with handwriting. From what I could see, it looked like they probably had dysgraphia. Mm-hmm. So it's about a special pencil that gets left in the pencil box all the time, and then a special little boy comes along and she ends up with him.
I was going to say, you mentioned dysgraphia. Talk a little bit, because I think that's a word people are very familiar with dyslexia and kids being on the spectrum, but I don't think there's a lot of folks who are aware of dysgraphia. Can you tell us just a quick little bit about that? Sure.
It's to put it in a nutshell, it is difficulty with writing, not just handwriting, but the actual formation of letters and writing words. So children who have dysgraphia are generally very intelligent, but they have a hard time getting their thoughts down on paper. And a lot of it is because they struggle to remember what the letters look like, how to form them. They can read, but trying to put it down on paper with their own handwriting is very difficult. So sometimes it can be combined with pencil grips, so they have difficulty actually holding a pencil and using a pencil correctly. So for a lot of these children, using a computer is a better option for them because they can see all the keys, so they don't have to try to think about what the letters look like. And in more severe cases, they may have to use text or speech to text, so they'll actually speak into a microphone and then the computer types out what they're saying. So it can be quite a hindrance for children when they're trying to produce work for school.
Sure.
When they have to write stories. I worked with one little boy who English was also an additional language for him. And I keep telling people that just because English is not their first language and they need help with that, it doesn't mean that they don't necessarily have another underlying learning disability or learning. I like to say different ability rather than disability. Sure. But, so when I used a computer with him, he was able to get his thoughts down much better than when he was trying to handwrite them. You could see that he struggled. He would start writing words and then he maybe got 3 words down and then he would say, Miss Dawn, I forgot what I was going to say. But you could see that he was putting so much energy into just trying to form letters and think about what the letters look like. So I'm not a dysgraphia expert, but I've certainly worked with children who have difficulties with writing.
Well, I mean, I think the knowledge that you shared is really useful, because I think what it does is it reminds us that a lot of kids have different abilities, and every kid has abilities, every kid has challenges, and they differ from kid to kid. And especially now, we're living in an age where we're able to offer kids so much more support than we might have been able to offer a kid, back when I was in elementary school, when I used to take my horse and wagon to school. So it's, I think that we should, celebrate the fact that we are living in this time where we can support kids and help them really achieve and become the person that they're meant to be.
Certainly, and that's where the inclusive education comes in, and that's why I do like the term different ability rather than disability, because these kids do have a lot to share, even if they do have some struggles. So, yeah, so I have a friend actually whose son has dysgraphia, and she told me that she wished my book had been out when he was little, because it also helps these children to understand that they're not the only one, they're not alone. So I do think it's important for children to realize that there are other children like them who may share the same different ability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and it's the same with the hearing impaired children. Sadly, there is a lot of denial sometimes when it comes to hearing loss, and everybody wants to have what we perceive as the perfect child, but these kids can go on to have just as productive lives as anybody else. And the earlier the diagnosis, the earlier they are fit with hearing aids or receive cochlear implants, whatever the answer is for them, then, you're giving them a jump start. So that's one of the reasons I wrote And So Ahmed Hears as well.
Well, I think this is it's fascinating, the life that you've lived and the experiences that you've had. And it's wonderful that you're able to share these experiences in these books with kids, so that kids can understand that we are living in this beautiful world. We are different, but deep down, we are the same. We have the same desire to be happy and to feel loved and to love our families.
Yes, and actually that kind of leads to my book, Go Away, Sean, which, in a sad way, it was inspired by my brother. My brother was not a very nice older brother when we were growing up, but he also had a very kind side. And he was in a terrible accident about 6 years ago now. So the book's called Go Away, Sean, but in many ways I wrote it to try and help my mom through the grieving. Mm-hmm. And so in this story, I try to focus more on the good side. I use patches as kind of a metaphor for the kindness. So when he was being nice, there were these patches, the holes in his jeans had patches. And at the very end, I actually say, come back. Mm. So even though it starts as go away, it ends with asking him to come back. Because we do miss him. He's still here, but not able to communicate with us. So it's a book about bullying, but it's also a book about forgiveness and ultimately the power of love.
Mm. So many wonderful, wonderful books and experiences and memories. I understand you've also written a book called Kitey. Tell us about that, please.
That was inspired by a little kitten that we adopted in Mongolia. And we adopted her at 3 months old. She was found behind a car in the middle of the winter. And if they didn't find a home for her, they were going to put her to sleep. So we adopted her, and she is the funniest, most rambunctious, playful cat we have ever had. So again, I had a dream one night and I got up and wrote a book about Kitey.
That's wonderful.
It's mostly written in rhyme, so it's a lot of fun to follow Kitey as she bounces and pounces across the pages.
So we have a fantastic website we want to tell people about. The address is a little complicated. It's doigda.wixsite, wixsite.com/mysite-1. That's your website. And you also have a Facebook author page. What's that, please?
Okay, my Facebook authors page is www.facebook.com/shoebears.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have had so much fun talking to the author of Melvin Fastidious, The Sailor, and so many other great books, Dawn Doig. Dawn, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guests will be Lori Olinsky and Faith Goldstein. They've been on the show before. Laura's been on the show talking to us about being small is not so bad after all. Faith's been on the show telling us about her wonderful book, Gorilla's Night Out. And we're just going to have a fun time talking to these wonderful, wonderful authors. We don't want you to miss it. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a wonderful children's book, no matter where you live on this beautiful world of ours, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest is fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. You can go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Dawn Doig. Be sure to check out Melvin Fastidious, The Sailor. I want to thank my amazing producer, Fatima Khan, for all she does. Don't miss her blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all of the support that she gives us. And, of course, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for subscribing to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Luminary, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. And most of all, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.